Hey, it's Chris, 20 strong from Chip Theory Games. I crowdfunded this, and I said, you know what? This seems solid. As a non-solo gamer, I said, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I am going to see what a combination of Too Many Bones, Hoplomachus Victorum, and Solar Sentinels can give us, right? How can you make dice and these cards work in a clever, unique way that doesn't bring too many issues? Spoilers, does it have too many issues? Was I pleased? Was I let down? Let's talk. So as you can see here, we have 3 decks that came with the base. You had 3 stat dice, and then you have 17 other dice over here for a total of 20, hence the 20 strong. You also have this little chip here with 2 sides, which one tracks the days and the other tracks the little colors, and it's fine. It's magnetic, it works, but I can't help but just tell you at the beginning, I feel like this was just way too much of a price point issued in the first place, as quality as this is. That aside, the gameplay itself here. The gameplay itself revolves around these 3 stat dice that you're going to have here. And these 3 stat dice are your health, your recovery, and basically your strategy, if you will. And the dice over here corresponding to color depends on how many hits they're going to provide you when you roll them. From most to least. So then it said, okay, how can you make 3 games out of 1? And they took this, and I give them a lot of kudos here at the beginning of the video. I looked at all 3 of these after I played Solar Sentinels, and I said, am I just going to be playing the same game 3 different ways? And surprisingly enough, no, actually. They all utilize these same 3 dice with these same 17 dice in relatively unique ways that don't make any of them feel like you couldn't have them alongside each other, if that makes sense. They do things uniquely enough that if you have one, you do not have the other in terms of how they're going to be interacting and flowing. Both a blessing and a curse with the dice and the card-based systems here. The randomization and the luck factor of this game is going to be, truth be told, before we dive into any one of the 3 individual games and mechanisms, it's very high. It's an incredibly swingy game. The combos that you will do, but along with the combos that the game will pull out of its sometimes, especially in Victorum and Solar Sentinels, is going to be grindingly frustrating where you just may be ultimately SOL. There may not be anything that you can do with the cards that are dealt and or the cards that are just face up depending on the shuffle. And that's going to leave a lot of people wanting necessarily. It's also going to appeal to some of the solo heavy strategy gamers because you go, I can game myself out of this. Truth be told, sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you roll the wrong dice. Sometimes your recovery just can't be upgraded. Sometimes you just get a combination of enemies that spawn other enemies, like in Solar Sentinels. And it ultimately feels a little bit hollow there at times. The other main issue is that, again, with something like Victorum, where you have these stacks of cards creating a pyramid, the top card on these stacks are the ones that you're going to have to interact with. And if you can't mitigate that, if you get a bad draw, if you pull your rival, essentially is what they're called, as a one that just ultimately is not reflective of your skill, technique, or strategy that round, again, it's going to leave you completely high and dry and basically just resetting the game from the get-go. And again, not that this game is long. I mean, you can play each of these probably in about half an hour-ish once you get the flow of the game. But again, as an overarching commonality between all 3 of these is they all felt not quite as complete in the rule set of the fact that, if you knew how to play the game, it'll make a lot of sense. But learning it is not necessarily as intuitive as you may like. They sound and feel like they're written by someone who already knows how to play the game. Not if you're someone completely brand new picking it up, it's going to be as clear or concise. And that's frustrating. That's really frustrating nowadays. And that reminds me of my experience with Too Many Bones in the first place. And I don't say that as a positive. So let's go into each of these 3 very briefly. Some differences, some, again, pleasantries, but also ultimately how I feel about it in the end. So here's the basic setup for Solar Sentinels. You can see here missions, ultimate bad guy stacks, and then character card. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be activating one of these stacks every round, grabbing a bunch of dice, rolling those dice, trying to knock out the character, and then getting the rewards and slowly winnowing your way down each of these stacks. Once you reach the bottom of one stack, then you can grab one of the boss monsters, activate whatever special abilities they may have, and then if you can defeat the boss, you win. Now, if you want added degree of difficulty, they say you can have these missions up at the top, and you start with one at the left and work your way one across as they are slowly completed. As you're doing that, you have your character card here, and you have the stats that are going to go along with it. The stats here reflect the dice correspondingly. So in this case, the Valkyrie allows me to increase these stats by 2 total. So I'll increase my recovery and my strategy each by 1. So my stats will actually be 3-3-3 instead of 3-2-2. So how do you win? Well, like I said, in this one, you'd have to knock out the boss monster after knocking out one of all of these stacks, because every turn you get to essentially choose which one of the stacks you're choosing from, which is going to activate. You lose if your health goes down to 0. Or, you know, really, if you don't have any dice to play with too, that can happen as well. Now, in this game, unlike one of the other two, all of the dice are available to you. So you just get to pick and choose whatever combination or set of dice you want to get. And that's where recovery and strategy come in, because when you choose to activate, say, this one right here, the Spore Seed Seekers. This is the symbol for during, a max of 4 dice can be committed during this engagement. Now, by itself, that just means, okay, I can only choose up to 4 dice. I need 2 damage right here. He does me 2 damage if I don't take him out in time. Because in this case, the middle value here, this 3, this strategy allows me 3 times to roll dice to knock him out. Well, you know what? I'm feeling lucky, so I'm just going to grab the 2 purple dice. I think I can hit him. Look, hit 1, hit 2. Now this counts as 2 hits, but this is 3 total damage because a crit is 2 damage each. So he would be out. I would get whatever reward is down here. You have the choice sometimes of the instant, as in this character's right here. You have the continuous right here, or the one-time use that you can choose to use whenever. Flip the top boss card face up. If it's already face up, discard it. Cannot be used in endgame. So basically you get to peek and see which one this one is. So I could slot it over here in my items. This also corresponds to how many items I can hold at any one time, is 3 as well there. So then these 2 dice that I use, well, my recovery is 3, well, I grab these dice and I rinse and repeat. Now, in this game, I actually get to burn one of the piles. So this is kind of nice. You take a look at how many health they have, how much damage they have. Well, okay, this one has 6 health. Well, I want to just burn that one. It also starts winnowing down the pile. You also see that there's a level 1, 1, 1. There's also level 2s in this deck. And you can also, if we go right actually down one further on this one, is an orange one. Most of these are level 2s, but essentially if you ever have one of these pop up, you are forced to engage it. Now this symbol right here is where things get tricky and where it gets very swingy, as I mentioned earlier. This symbol means you have to activate somebody else up there. Now in this case, let's say that this wasn't the way it was, and maybe these were my top 3. Now you can start to see, well, I have to activate one of these other ones. Oh, now I have to activate this one. So then maybe I don't want to activate either of these because they're going to activate another. So now all of a sudden I have 3 bad guys here. Now in this case, I have all 17 of my dice still available to me, but I've got a 5 health, a 5 health, and a 4 health. So I only have so many dice that I'm going to be able to roll here. So as I'm rolling, then you get 1 turn to allocate them as part of that, as the second phase of things. So I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he'd be out. And now I have 2 extra turns, since I have 3 on the blue dice here, to do this. So now, okay, well, I want to take out as many of these guys as I can, so I'm going to take 3 dice this time. Oh, wow, I just nailed it. I'm really rolling well for the camera. Oh, we would have to re-roll the blank there. So I'm killing this now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. And I need 3 more hits, though, so I need to roll at least 3 more dice. Well, if I'm getting crits, maybe not. So this is my last round. Okay, I only got 2 hits there, so he still has 1 health. He's going to do me a damage, and during it, any crits actually deal 0 damage. So those crits that I mentioned over here and over here, they actually wouldn't have done anything if I was paying attention to that. This one says crits cannot be applied to enemies. Whoops, that one's going to strike that altogether. So those are synergistic. And then this one, if you roll on the dice step 2 or more misses, discard the enemy. No reward. Well, I didn't have that happen, but now you can start to see how things are going to snowball. And when you have that dynamic happen, there's not a whole lot you can do always to mitigate it. Because let's say I actually, took out all these guys. Afterwards, you get the rewards, or you clear whatever's left because they don't stay out, which is good. And maybe I take a damage or 2. So now my 3 health maybe is down to 1 because it took me 2 rounds to clear it out. Or maybe, each of these did me a damage, because if those crits hadn't have affected, I would have taken at least 2 damage because I wouldn't have been able to take out a 5, a 5, and a 4. As I said, snowballing very quickly. And that's just one level on this because each of these stacks has 15. The mission here is use 3 items. Well, I only maybe cleared one of those guys and I had this item, so I have to do that one. And so then you can start to see how swingy this game could be. Now let's see, let's just count up, for example, how many dice did I use there, as an unsuccessful turn? And I used a total of 11 dice there. What's my recovery? 3. Well, I'm going to grab the best 3 dice, the red and the 2 purple. Well, the rest of these go to my used pool. So now I only have this many dice. Well, all those yellows I didn't use, well, again, you can start to see if you get one of these guys again with 6 health or 5 health, it's going to start to build up. Even the one with 2 health triggers somebody else. So that's where the recovery is actually by far and away the most important stat. And if you really swing the recovery stat and you get a lot of bonus on the recovery based off that reward some of these enemies will give you, you can really pump that up. And in this game, it can be a savior. It can be the biggest make it or break it. But you can also see how the difficulty just escalates significantly very, very quickly, especially as you go down through the deck and start to get to level 2s or the oranges. The other thing that I do not like about this whatsoever is they say if you're going to play this game truly the way it's designed, right? The first game you don't play with missions. As you can see, you only put up one of these missions, and once you complete it, you get to put up another one. I think maybe one of the characters has a way to do that, and maybe there's a card or 2 in here that does too. But otherwise, you're at the whims of the missions, because ultimately they say in the real game, you have to get all 4 of your missions and beat the big boss. Having all 4 of those done before if you're going to get the true victory. Now, that's okay, but that's also really tough when you don't have any real significant way to mitigate that in the first place. It's going to leave you feeling very frustrated not being able to get the mission completed when you're stuck on the first one, that you're just not getting any cards that populate. As I said, this one as the down arrow, needing 3 of those used. Well, if I'm getting all the passives and the instant rewards on all of the ones that I'm able to defeat, well, I'm stuck on the first mission and I may get through 3, 4, 5 enemies before I start to get anything I need. Well, if I'm already through a third of one of the decks and, I'm really trying to hurry because my life is getting low, I'm running out of dice, I'm not going to get anywhere close to all 4 of these done. So that's my big issue with this one. I mean, the recovery system, as I'll say, with all 3 of these games, the recovery system is by far and away the most unique, enjoyable aspect of all 3. But it's also a little bit overpowered at times, and it also can come back to bite you in the rear end, especially with Hoplomachus, if you're not careful, depending on who your rivals are and how they manipulate your own dice pool. So that's Solar Storm in a nutshell. I'm having a lot of trouble even just picking these cards up off of the table right now. And that goes into the price point of this game as a whole. It's like these cards were, these are the super flexible ones that are just like really kind of nice and cool. At the same time, they're kind of hard to grasp and they slip out of your hand occasionally. And I feel like regular cards almost would have been just as fine. And this is a premium product that didn't necessarily need it from this aspect. So I feel weird saying that, especially as we already talked about, this is, less than terribly useful, even though it's kind of cool and magnetic as well. Now, Hoplomachus here is a different beast altogether. Hoplomachus takes those same basic concepts of your character card with your health, your strategy, and your recovery, but you have a different dice pool that's allocated to you at the beginning of the game. Only a partial dice pool, and you're going to be having to actually recruit from this dice pool that's not even available to you, not exhausted like you do when you have the other ones that are unavailable to you, but a third just reserve pool that you're going to have to actively recruit from as an action or reward in terms of when you get bonuses in this game in the first place. Now with this one, you're going to be slowly traversing, trying to defeat your 3 Primus here, the 1, 2, and 3 vertical cards under the stacks of horizontal cards. You have your pyramid here of 2, 3, and 4 that you're going to be moving back and forth adjacently to and fro, battling or utilizing the top card that is present at one of these locations. And after you deal with it, you just take it off, give it as a reward, throw it to the discard pile, or if it has this little fire icon here in the corner, you can see that it's actually going to be potentially influencing the big bad, which is going to be chosen at the beginning of the game as well. And you have to beat all those 3 rivals essentially in order to get this guy activated and then to beat him at the end. So that's how you do that. And you have to do that trickily enough here by actually not emptying enough of these piles at the same time. Because if you ever empty a pile, well, you just can't go back there. And if you ultimately can't get over to an area where one of the Primuses is, or if you can't navigate back and forth adjacently, well, you might be SOL. And so that becomes a very different spatial dynamic you're dealing with that isn't there at all in Solar Sentinels, apart from the 3 different stacks that you're drawing from. And so the other tricky part about this is these all have very strong abilities that you're going to be actually dealing with in the Primus. But then even when you defeat them, they basically give you a curse, a bane. So this one, for example, if you have fewer dice recruited than you have in the training grounds, this thing, ignore it. But you recover all your dice, get all your dice back, and then swap all of your dice here for all of the dice here. Well, if you don't realize that in the first game when you're playing it through, all of a sudden I've recruited almost all my dice, and I go from having 15 of my 17 dice to 2 dice. And that is something that really happens a lot more in Victorum than anything else. These Banes just elevate and increase the difficulty of that swinginess so much more. So they say that you're free to look at the Banes and read the text at any point so you know what you're dealing with, because your strategy is going to have to be heavily based around them more than anything else in this game. And the limited dice pool that you're slowly, gradually growing, as opposed to having it all in the other, that makes it a little bit of a different puzzle in a nutshell. Again, recovery being an amazing, amazing tool, but ultimately also can be your Achilles heel in the case of this, minion rival there, if you will. Now, after shuffling it around here, you can see that there are 3 different types of conflict cards here: the battling, the rewards, and sort of the event cards, if you will. And as you utilize them, they do the same thing that they may have done in Solar Storms, where you may get an instant reward, you may get a passive reward, or you may get a one-time use reward, depending on the symbol that's there. So basically, then you also have some of these, like the green ones here, that only are fulfillable in terms of the reward when you complete the top part. And just like with Victorum and Too Many Bones, the blue die, as I mess it all up here, is the strategy dice, and that determines not only, again, how many rerolls you may have, but it also determines how many items you can hold. And so that's going to stay true in this game, just like it did with the previous. 2 other small nuances to go along with this: as one of your rewards, you can recruit a dice from here or the reserve into your dice pool, or you can grab a skill tactic. You have 4 asymmetric skills that are one-time uses here, as you can see: hamstring, stun, bolster, and adrenaline, which are great skills, but you get the choice of one or the other. And then you also have the ability to upgrade dice. If I'm upgrading, I take one of the ones from my pool and I get to do the next highest. So yellow to green, green to blue, blue to purple, purple. Well, I've already got the red to start out with. And so that's the other main different dynamic that you're doing as you're going along. Otherwise, the damage and the health works very similarly. You can see the iconography there is the same. There's activation of other enemies here. In this case, it's not from the stacks, but it's from the adjacency around it. And then, like I mentioned, the little flame icons are going to interact with how hard the boss is at the end. The ramp up in difficulty of these bosses is probably the worst in all 3 of these games. And I don't say that as necessarily as bad as it sounds, but I mean in the sense that you're going along and it seems to be going okay, and there's just such a different degree of difficulty between the main core of this pyramid and the bosses. It sort of sometimes makes you go, huh? And it stops you in your tracks. And the degree and the jump in difficulty in that way was really surprising. Similarly with these Banes, you're going to have to pay attention to these Banes that are on these enemies, rivals that you're taking out, and you're going to have to take them out in a certain order. It's not like this is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They're randomly placed down from a pool that you have of about like 8 or 10, because they're the ones that, you don't use. As you can see here on my card, this is my player card. On the other side is the rival card. And so you just choose ones that have not been chosen for the actual player card. And so that's the issue with this in a nutshell, is that if you're not paying attention to that from the get-go and basically driving your whole strategy around that rather than the cards itself, it sort of creates a split, and you're either having to choose the cards themselves and mitigating those, or just having to choose which one of these 3 in the order and operations, because again, you can't get to them unless you go through all of these first in the first place. And then, are you going to go through these? Are you going to go through these? You have the power-ups that you've gotten along the way that are going to be enough, to get you there in the first place. Do you have enough dice? So there's almost too much going on, and it seems very split in terms of personalities of randomness, swinginess that comes with just the stack of 3 cards that's on each of these that could just screw you in the first place, the limited dice, but also what ones you draw. And so there's just even much less mitigation or overall control in this one than there say is in Solar Storms, which is great if you're looking for a really hard challenge with a huge difficulty ramp up. Doesn't have the missions and quests that you have to do in order, which is a great thing, but it also gives you that, which can also leave you high and dry as well. So again, I love the recovery mechanism, and I love the utilization of the dice as a resource management here. But ultimately, you know, you can just also get bad dice roll, like I mentioned, in any of these three, and just get complete misses. And when your dice pool is already limited to start with, there's a lot less wiggle room in this game than there is in Solar Storm. So this is the Too Many Bones setup. If you're very familiar with Too Many Bones, this is going to look very similar already. The baddies, the enemies that you're going to be pulling are going to be dependent on the day that you're on. So for day 1, you're going to take 1 of these 1 value cards. For day 2, you're going to take 2 of them. For day 5, you would take a 5. And so this is the tricky part. As you lay them out in front of you here, you have the same setup in Solar Sentinels that you did of being able to take out these guys before they start taking damage to you. And you're going to only have so much to begin with. Now, the tricky, different part of this game, and the unique, clever mechanic in Too Many Bones aspects of 20 Strong, is that this was the only one of the 3 that if you roll misses here on the dice, with the little circles with nothing in the middle, well, you can allocate them individually at the bottom of this card, that if you have all 4 of them, you can get unlocked a special ability, flipping over, increasing your stats by 1. But also, if you have them down here, you can utilize them as a one-time ability to change what's going on and to mitigate in the battle in the first place. The nice thing is if you have all 4 of these spots filled, you can use that ability 4 times. That's also the only way to flip it over to the other side to get the innate ability of the increased stats, but it gives you a lot of ways of mitigating, and so having that in a different way rather than recovery is kind of nice. But as you're doing this, you're either drawing from the encounter deck on the day, or you're going to the encounter pile over here, which has 3 different types of encounters. You have locks, or items that are locked within a box that you have to, again, put hits in each of these dice slots during the battle to unlock it, which gets you the ability down here, which is shown on the other side here, which in this case is a permanent or an ongoing. Then you also have 2 other kinds in here. You have the blues, which are the bad guy boss elements of things that are going to mitigate or give you worsening circumstances depending on what you're fighting. So this one actually forces you to battle, even though you went to the encounter deck rather than the baddie deck, if you say. But in this case, you get to use 1 unused tyrant, ignore all text on that tyrant's card. This does not count as facing the tyrant. So if this was my tyrant I chose, I have to grab one of these other ones and use his stats of 8 and 3 now. So that might be a significant bump up than, say, the level 1, 2, or 3 that I may have been on otherwise here dealing with on the normal day. And so the problem with this is that if you don't fight these, the number of these that are left in the deck makes this guy over here stronger at the end by the time you get to him. Now, how do you get to him? Well, because that's ultimately how you win this game, is you have to get to him after a certain number of day in order to be able to unlock him. Anytime you reach that day, you can fight him. But if you get to day 12, you have to fight. And that's what you're going to be dealing with on the other side. And the other last portion of things here is the potential peace or warfare, essentially. If you can complete the peace, you don't have to deal with the battle. Discard an item and then scout. Or if scouted, banish 1 die or lose 1. So this is the tricky, knockoff or balancing act that you're going to be doing in this one. Now, scouting is something different altogether. It gives another way of mitigating, which again, a little bit more so in this game in that way, is scouting allows you to take one of these cards from the top of the deck, and instead of just randomly grabbing it as you may normally do so, you actually get to create a second stack. We'll create it here, even though usually you would place it above. And then you get to choose either I'm going to take from the top of the scouted stack, or I still get to take from the top of the normal stack. And you can do that on either stack, if you will. So you're still given plenty of choices. And that's the main way you're going to mitigate your enemies, similar to Solar Storms there, as when they had the 3 stacks, or similarly, the stacks that were present in 3 depth in Hoplomachus. Now, the trouble is, again, this is completely deck dependent. As you can see here, some of these are going to be synergistic. And as you start to get the 3s and the 4s even, you're going to be having to choose how many of these can I actually take out with my 2 health, my 1 recovery, and 2, 2, 2, 3, 2 in terms of battling. And again, it's a difficulty thing that it ramps up significantly, very quickly in this game, because ultimately the deck of encounters that you're going to be trying to get with these items or the peace ones to avoid some of this, well, you need to get them, but if you get them, then you're not going to get the rewards that are here. If you don't get the rewards to get stronger, well, you're not going to be able to battle the ones later. And so therein yet lies the yin and the yang of that, is the balancing act between those two elements. So again, the difficulty is there. The escalation is there. This one has a little bit, frankly speaking, more controllable mitigation in the terms of having you have the actual control of mitigating it. And so it works from that aspect. But ultimately, it also is going to be very still driven by the hits and misses, driven by the lower recovery overall, which still, again, in all three of these games remains the overpowered stat, more so valuable than anything else. And then also followed by the strategy. Health is actually by far and away the least important stat in any of these three games, which sounds weird to say. It's a buffer, it's a good one, but if you have to choose an order rank them, it's clearly third behind the other two, at least in my opinion, based off of my plays. So there you go. Those are the three games: Solar Storm, Hoplomachus, Too Many Bones. If I had to rank them at the time of me filming this, I'm probably going to rank them in that order. I probably like Solar Storms the best, I probably like Hoplomachus second, and I probably like Too Many Bones third. I went into this as a non-solo gamer going, you know what, I know that there are some good games out there. Solo is not my preferred way to play, but sometimes I like going outside of my comfort zone. I do it on my crowdfunding roundups. I do it on, the backing stuff sometimes of saying, okay, what am I willing to do? And this was one of those. Ultimately, though, I didn't find myself having fun. It turned more into a min-max puzzle than a, wow, this is really thematic. This is really engaging in terms of feeling like I'm getting true progression. There's just so much randomness, and this is from someone who loves dice rolling and the randomness of draws, that it becomes sort of almost independent lesson in frustration at the sometimes too, with stuff just not going either the card or the dice way. Because if your recovery is only, 2 or 3 or whatever, and you're having to roll 4 dice and you just get unlucky and you miss a bunch, you're just burning through dice, and you're going to burn through half your dice pool at a low level, and you're better off almost starting over sometimes. And I don't know, is that going to be pleasurable to know that, you're just going to have to start over if things don't go your way before you even get close to knowing whether or not you're going to win, because clearly you're just not? That's a little bit deflating overall. Repetition of doing this over and over again with potentially the same results, maybe mitigating a little bit less this time and a little bit more that time of better successes in terms of how far you're able to go. Yeah, I mean, you can have some progression there. There is some overarching strategy, but unlike 2 of these 3 base games you may be more familiar with from a chip theory standpoint, there's not a way to ultimately strategize this enough to give you that control that if you preferred those games in the first place, to mimic that enough that you're going to desire this similar experience. Now, obviously, because, dice being very heavy and card driven being very heavy, but the similarities were there at least initially. But now, as I've played more, it becomes more and more divergent from their predecessors as well. As I said previously, it's relatively smooth. Once you know how to play, it flows rather nicely. Ultimately, for the price point of all 3 of these, you have 3 games for the price of about $65 as a crowdfunding backer. That, individually speaking, for one of these games to be $20-ish, okay, not great, not horrible feeling at this point. But also, I look at this and I go, as a solo game, is it really going to appease to everyone that's looking at this? It has a high amount of randomness. No one's going to dispute that. I just don't feel like it provided me with an experience that I feel like replicating time and time and time again. And it's kind of discouraging. That's why I feel like I prefer games like The Loop rather than Ghost Stories or Last Bastion, where the degree of difficulty can be there. But if you can't ever feel like you're making traction, it does feel somewhat self-defeating. And this game doesn't go that far, but it also didn't make me want to play it again. And that's partially probably because of the escalation of the difficulty as these games progress towards the end game in the first place. The end game is such a huge step up in all 3 of these games as a similar, overlapping, overarching, common experience that it ultimately just kind of made me go, whoa, because you're doing so much planning and mitigating along the way for just what is physically in front of you that it becomes hard to then have to plan for that as well, because this game doesn't give you a whole lot of wiggle room to do both at the same time. You're having to choose constantly one or the other. And yes, the rewards are great. Yes, the rewards can be very useful. You can just not get the right rewards that pop up. You can get the wrong set of enemies comboing together. And so ultimately for me, that outweighed feeling clever in this game. Because, I mean, yes, you can feel very clever. You can feel very accomplished when you win it. But it's going to be a lot fewer and farther between, which, depending on your mileage, may appease you. It may be off-putting. Because like I mentioned, it's getting further than some people may like from the named predecessors in the first place of being very strategically driven games. Even though they're mimicking it in a similar style, it just doesn't still give that same feeling to me. So ultimately for me, I'm not going to keep this game. I just did not find myself enjoying it at the end of the day, and that's okay. Like I mentioned, I'm not a typical solo gamer. I don't think solo has anything to do with this. One of the other games I've just been playing more recently that I got is Kinfire Delve. I honestly probably prefer this over 20 Strong as a purely solo game as well. So it's not just my feelings towards solo games in general. It just didn't click with me for whatever sense because of those things that I mentioned. Every game is not for everybody. I recognize that a lot of people like this game, and I recognize that a lot of people have enjoyed this game. I am just not one of those people, and that's okay. Hopefully, though, that this was helpful in terms of you figuring out whether or not it's right for you, because that's ultimately the most important thing. And if this sounds good to you, go out there, get it. I had some hope that this was ultimately going to be a little bit of a cooperative situation in the future too. They said they haven't ruled it out, but even right now, even if they told me this was going to be a cooperative in the future, I'm not sure even that would allow me to feel comfortable keeping it, and knowing how I feel about it, I just don't think it would get played. And ultimately, if I'm not going to play it, if I'm not going to have fun playing it, it doesn't stay in the collection anymore. I got too much stuff in the first place. So there you go. 20 Strong, my thoughts ultimately, if you like it, great. I can't recommend it if you're like me though. So if we have similar tastes, hopefully that was helpful. If we have dissimilar tastes, hopefully also that was very helpful as well. Let me know down below what you think. Comments, questions, concerns. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.